All right. Welcome back to our Simple Healthy Life podcast, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations. Real and insightful. That's an interesting one for today's topic on topics that we find interesting. And at the very least, this is one of those ones I find interesting. And it's going to be real for us. And I'd like to maybe offer some insight. But this will probably be one of the more, I don't even really understand this term. What's the term esoteric?
Yeah, esoteric is kind of like spiritual in some sense. It's just like it's not tangible, not of this world, otherworldly maybe.
Okay, so let's go with this one is in regards to something that's outside of our five senses. All right. So most of the people that know me well know that I'm very interested in things that are outside of our five senses, whether it's any type of energy or perception or in this case, I've been really hung up on something they call the Stargate program, which is essentially in 1972, the CIA, if you remember that this was during the Cold War, the CIA created a program that was designed to have people that had psychic ability remote view other parts of the world. And they created this program, and they ended up finding this guy, Joe McConigal, who was remote viewer number one. And he's still alive. This is what kicked off the genesis of this podcast, is I just listened to 6 hours of him talk. He's 78 now. And really told the story of his ability to remote view. So for those of you that are hearing that word for the very first time, remote view is essentially you close your eyes, put yourself into a meditative state, and you can, he says that viewing's the wrong word. What he was doing was sketching what he saw. So they would give him something like coordinates, and he would close his eyes, go into this meditative state, and sketch what he saw. Now, there's definitely multiple ways to look at this. Number one, if you put up ChatGPT right now and put in remote viewing, CIA, the number one thing it'll tell you is that there was no actionable stuff that came out of this, okay? Which I find very interesting, since it was supposedly shut down in 1995, which means they gave this program from 1972 to 1995 to work.
That's a lot of years for something that didn't work.
For something that didn't work.
Yeah.
Then this guy, Joe McConigal, still alive, goes on all these podcast interviews and talks about missions that he, quote unquote, missions that he went on. And has, in some ways, at least for me, convinced me that this is something that is possible. Now, take it one step further, you can actually go on Spotify right now, and the CIA has the declassified tapes on how to learn how to do this is actually on Spotify right now. You can go and find them. So I want to start by talking a little bit about this concept of remote viewing, but I'd also like to ask your perspective on some of this stuff, especially when it comes to things that are outside of our five senses.
Yeah. I mean, I think those things it's very easy for someone to be quite skeptical on, well, if I can't see it, if I can't touch it, then it must not exist. But at the same time, those same people are like, yeah, but this medication is a sugar pill, like placebo effect, 25% increase. Like, okay, well, that's pretty intangible to me. That's a miracle. And we just kind of, every day I hear people talk about it as if it's not a miracle, if it's not something that's extremely fascinating, right? No one knows why that exists. No one knows how it exists. Brain seems to do things that it can't otherwise do. They had previous, like in ancient times, their medications, quote unquote, worked. Yet it was like, okay, lay down on this table and then I'm going to take a chicken bone and dance around you and sing a song and you're cured. And, you know, not modern medicine, but there was some evidence that that stuff worked, right? And so, you know, you can be as skeptical as you want, but I think everything should be approached with an open mind, and especially when it comes to meditation and similar, you know, kind of branches of that. We don't know enough about that. Actually, one of the cool things, if you go through like some of these like Buddhist kind of reflections or Hindu or yogic kind of I guess teachings, what you'll often find is that real advanced meditators talk about this breaking of plane that happens on a regular basis, even when they're not meditating. And that's like super fascinating. You can look up more about this, but people who've tried to get to the source of it all, right, through meditation and just trying to, you know, do all the things, right, they find that when they go throughout their day, there is often this breaking of plane that happens where they start to see things, like almost hallucinate other creatures, like pop up and just, you know, appear to be in front of them or like say things to them. And I mean, I suppose you could argue that they're just crazy, or you could keep an open mind and say, like, these are people who like literally all day are practicing this like very disciplined act and control of the mind in some ways, and yet they're having these crazy reflections during the normal day. So yeah, I'm all for the esoteric. I think it's super cool.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because from listening to these podcasters, Joe Talk specifically, they asked him the question, like, can anybody do this? Right? Do you have to be psychic, quote unquote? He was like, no, anybody can do it. And they were like, he's like, so why don't they? He's like, well, essentially, for the beginning of this whole process, number one, there wasn't a book. They kind of wrote the book. So imagine what it must be like to have to write the book and learn how to do it. But he said took him hundreds of hours of working through it and continuing to work through it. And it was actually really interesting the way he described, as you breathe a certain way, you can essentially get this energy to go through the body. And, you know, when we do our breath classes, when you can throw on YouTube or whatever, and they'll start to talk about the breath and bring the energy into the head, and right, as you progress through this, and he even says, like, most people will start to fidget and move, but push past that limitation and keep going. Eventually, you'll start to be able to do this type of stuff. And, you know, who am I to say no? Of course. Essentially, what I'm saying is, yeah, it does take a lot of work. It does take a lot of belief, right? I think there's got to be some element, of course, where you have to believe that you can do it. And then you got to go out there and you got to do it and you got to put the work in. But so for those of you that are skeptical out here, here's one particular example, which was pretty interesting. One of the first things they asked this new organization that was set up by the U.S. military, don't forget, like funded and paid for, was to look at this area in Russia. And
is this a submarine one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've heard about this.
I have.
Yeah. And essentially, he comes back with, okay, there's this submarine that is like, I think he said like 30 feet short of a football field and like 3 times as wide as any submarine that has ever been built. And they're building it at this location. And don't forget, you know, we were doing a lot of this with like kind of like satellite imagery, right? So you had to like, in order to verify that, they'd have to kind of go on the satellite. There wasn't camera phones and stuff like that back then. So they're like, okay, thank you, but you're wrong. There's nothing like that. There's like no structures that are on this bay big enough in order to house something like that. So whatever, good effort. So he actually went as far as to say they're going to launch it on this date, which I'm still very interested in. And we can get into kind of the time and that's something that fascinates me. And they said, okay, well, whatever. So they took pictures from the satellite a couple days before, a couple days before that, and then lo and behold, there's video pictures, and I guess there's no video, but pictures like sequential pictures of them digging a trench from like a half a mile back to this bay.
Wow.
And the Russians did that because there would be no reason for them to look a half a mile back at this massive building warehouse, right? So they actually built it and launched the first there's like a level, like M grade submarine that was as big as he said it was going to be. That was basically impossible. Nobody had ever even thought that this could be. But he saw it from his base in Stanford.
That's crazy.
How nuts is that?
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. And yeah, like what is the how is that rejected or refuted? Is that refuted? Is that a refuted claim? Because I have heard that story as well.
So he saw it and drew it. So that they have the drawing of it. Now, of course anybody could draw something post, right? But the claim is that it was drawn before they launched it. So the CIA, the U.S. military will, if you read one side, everything's refuted and it's all BS and none of it's real. But then you read the other side and it says that he produced 450 missions over his 23 years of service.
Wow.
So
why do they keep going? It's so interesting because this is literally a thing. People will say, well, this can't be on the CIA. Literally go to the CIA website. It's literally on there, and you can read about remote viewing and this project. I've done it because I thought that was I thought that was fake too. So like, there's no way it's there. And then you can read through some of these things. And what's so interesting is that if it were completely refutable, which I think is the ultimate conclusion from them, right? Or like they allude to it. Well, why did it go on for so long? Why was there so many studies? I mean, can't you easily refute that? You have a couple of people who claim they can do something and then you say, all right, prove it. And then after like a week, you say, all right, we're good here.
Yeah, you couldn't prove it. Okay. Yeah. So he talks about that and the interviewer was really, I thought did a really great job because he asked all the questions I would want to know. Like, okay, so you're saying that you could find missing children? He's like, yes. He's like, okay, well, did you? And he's like, yes. He's like, so what did the parents say? And he was like, well, the parents, I have all of these things like that showed the parents were just grateful to get the kids back. Well, what did the government say? Well, now the government says none of it happened. So one of the coolest things he talked about was like they would bring in these generals, they would bring in these people from the Pentagon, and they would say, show us. We'd go into this technique, they would do it, he would show them, and he said about 50% would tell them that they were messing with the devil and they wanted to shut everything down. And then the other 50% would say that we're doing God's work and that we need to be doing it more. And he would say it was very interesting to him because he never found either of those things. He never found what he was doing to be in any way religious. He said it was specifically science. And the way he viewed it was specifically science. And the way they approached it was specifically science. And the way they taught it was specifically science. And so if that's all out there, like why are we saying it didn't exist?
Right. Yeah. There's a number of obviously, well, maybe obvious, I don't know, books written on the subject, like almost like pseudoscience type of books, and they're kind of interesting. I'll have to look it up, but there's one book that I actually have that I haven't really finished, but it's by a guy who like didn't even pass kindergarten, but so he wasn't indoctrinated, if that's the word you want to call it. Like he didn't go through normal schooling, and he kind of comes to a lot of the conclusions from way back whenever this book is written, probably in around the same time, like 60s, 70s. He comes to a lot of the same conclusions that we now know to be true, but didn't know back then, such as like everything is sound and energy and wavelengths, and nothing, no, even thoughts can't necessarily be, don't dissipate. They just kind of like go off onto the ether. They're like energetic pattern just kind of goes. And he has all these sorts of thoughts, but he was big into this idea that you could remote view, and there are otherworldly things possible just by the science of it all. And so I think this stuff is interesting. I think it's very easy for people to say, well, it doesn't exist because I can't do it. But I mean, you also can't regularly hit half-court shots like Steph Curry either. You can't even dream of doing that.
It's so funny you talk about this term pseudoscience, right? And it's like every generation of people has had pseudoscience. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're going through something right now. I'm not going through it, but we as a society are going through it with archaeologists. I don't know if, Graham Hancock and all the stuff you heard about this.
Yeah.
Right. They're challenging the dogma. They're saying that, like, okay, some people say that we've been around for 10,000 years, right? Other people are like, wow, really? Because we just found Göbekli Tepe that's been around for, dated for 75,000 years, right? The Sphinx is X amount of years old versus what we thought. Right. But the very first thing you do to refute somebody's new perspective is call it pseudoscience.
Sure, yeah.
And every generation has had that. I mean, before, like, I'll try to give it a better example, but like, I mean, you kind of hit on it, like the bones and the witch doctor, and like, that was, at one point, that was all that we had. And then we developed into this new understanding of X. And until that became mainstream, that was pseudoscience. And then we developed into this new understanding of pharmaceuticals, and that was pseudoscience. And now we just keep challenging the dogma and keep finding that these things are, in fact, real.
Yeah. Well, science had been oriented around the results, right? What can you prove? What can you measure? And then anything that you couldn't measure was then fake or not real. But yet, it turns out that maybe there are things that you can't repeatedly measure that are still real, right? And I think that would make perfect sense. I mean, how many, even like Carl Jung's work, which just this phenomenal mind, and he makes these outrageous claims at the time, and they're still outrageous, like, wow, your dreams actually mean something, and wow, there's synchronicity, like the universe basically tries to tell you all of these things, and wow, there's universal consciousness. This is not a run-of-the-mill, like, random Joe. Like, you could make the argument for the failing kindergarten guy Victor, or whatever his name is. You could make the argument that he's just like an imbecile. Okay, fair enough. But this is Carl Jung. I mean, he's literally one of the most respected minds in psychology, and he says all our consciousness are connected. And he tells these crazy stories. Like, he was working with a patient one time, and she's reviewing her dreams, and she's like, yeah, I've been having this repeat nightmare. It's really bugging me. Like, every time I go to sleep, I dream of this dune beetle kind of thing. I don't know, the beetle with the Asian, I don't know, with the horns, that one, whatever that one is. We'll put it in post. No. That one, every time I have a dream, a nightmare, like, this thing comes up, and I don't know what it means. And Carl Jung starts to, like, as soon as he begins kind of his assessment of what this might be, it's a bang at the window, and they both look, and it's literally this beetle that bangs on the window as soon as he starts to talk. It's like, there's no way that's a coincidence. Right. And he's not making it up. He's literally he's a doctor. He's a respected doctor still to this day. It's incredible.
Oh yeah, and there's so much out there, and I joke all the time. I make this, like, if you don't believe in some of this stuff, like, tell me why I can walk in the house and know my wife is upset. Mm-hmm. Not even with their back to me, right?
You feel it.
I can feel it. I don't know what the reason is. I don't know, but I know it's true. I know in my feeling that it's there, right? So I like to think of it as everything is on a spectrum. And if Carl Jung is correct, and there's this universal consciousness that's all connected, then anything is possible, in my opinion. And when you listen to these people their word is out, right? Like, so if this had happened in 1970, and let's say that he had an unfortunate accident or he was older and he died, maybe we would say, oh, okay, cool. But this is a guy that's 78 years old that has lived through 23 years of service in the U.S. military, operating, doing this, and is literally just telling his story. Why would you hang on to that story for so long? If it was fake, could you imagine coming up with a lie that was like, Mike, what have you been doing for the last 25 years? Well, let me tell you, right? For 25 years, I've been doing this. You'd be like, there's no way he's like, why would I make that up?
Right.
Why? Maybe like a small lie, but to make this part of your personality and like who you are and what you've done. So it's pretty amazing. And he does talk about that there's other people still doing it, which I think is also interesting. I know the interviewer was going to try to reach out and get more people on. They were doing that stuff. I said I wanted to start with remote viewing, but I think we did a podcast already on this, so forgive me if I'm wrong.
NDEs, are we going there?
We're not going NDE,
okay.
no, but let's face it. Okay, so I was going to go with the telepathy tapes, and this woman that's basically kind of proving that there is connection, there's mind-to-mind connection possible. But because you said NDE, I want to talk about this. It's a little different. The same day that I was listening to this podcast, it was 6 hours, so I listened to a couple hours at a time. But what he says, Joe says, and they asked him about life after death, because there's something interesting about the way this operates with time. And they essentially talked to him about, like, now that you've had this experience, are you afraid of death? And he was like, no, I'm not. I don't. I've seen enough things to understand the way to develop a theory on what I think happens. And I want the listeners to think about this from a perspective, from this perspective. What Joe says, just what Joe says, one guy, multiple people, but one guy. When you die, you are actually given that life review. The only difference is it's not a life review. Like, you don't sit in front of a TV screen and say, like, oh, look at me, I'm here. Oh, look at me, I did that. You get this life review, but it's from everybody around you's perspective. So if you hurt somebody, you feel the way that they felt when you hurt them. If you loved somebody, you feel the way that they felt when you loved them. And by doing that, by getting that review, that's what helps you as a soul really progress and learn and become kind of ingrained in this whole game that we're talking about here. It's not the first time I've heard that. In fact, I think the Hindus, it's a very Hindu style belief system. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, it just makes you think, right? Then you think in some ways, I'm sure that, like, oh, I'm doing good, and you play some mental gymnastics over certain situations, and then you're like, well, dang, if I really place myself into this person's shoes and try to, like, see it from their perspective, maybe if I were being the ultimate judge here, maybe I wasn't in the right, and that's an interesting thought. It's also kind of interesting because you're like, I know that I know where I come from in a lot of ways, like, especially like my day-to-day, I think about, like, a lot of the people I talk to, like, I legitimately care, like, I really do, and I want the best for them. And so that's, like, kind of cool to be like, well, hopefully that means something. Hopefully some of the other sketchy things, hopefully that's not too bad. Hopefully that doesn't add up.
Yeah, I think for me it would just be this, like, feeling of, like, ugh, like that, oh my God, I know I did that wrong. And oh, that's how they felt about it. Like, man, that was really a tough thing for me. But I thought it was an interesting thing. As most people know about me, I believe that the soul is infinite, so we're not tied to this one go around, which I think is, use the best term, mental gymnastics, right? That can give you leave to do the wrong thing, or it can really help you try to do the right thing as often as you can.
Yeah.
But one thing that I'm 100% certain of is that we have these five senses that are mainstream, but there's extra stuff out there, right? Like, we know there's light you can't see. We know there's sound you can't hear. So why is it only those two senses that don't work up to 100%?
And those are like the conscious senses too, right? Those the five are the ones that we could like say, okay, I observe this one, but they know that people unconsciously observe all sorts of phenomenon. You know, like the fact that they've done studies where they know that people can sense other people's fear or anxiety, even if it's not like the pheromones of it in some way, they act accordingly. You know, when someone is much more confident, they act accordingly, they respond accordingly. And, you know, someone could say, well, it's body language, it's this, it's tact, and it's all those things, but that doesn't happen on a conscious level. And so what is that?
Or how about the one you talk about sometimes with it? They did the study with the 2 decks of cards and one of them was rigged, and just using them.
Oh, yeah.
Eventually, most people were like, I don't know why, but I don't like that one.
Yeah, the Iowa gambling test, where they intuitively, you know, people with a normal functioning brain could intuitively assert that, okay, these decks of cards are rigged. I'm not going to pick from them. I don't know why, but it just feels that way. I don't know why. It just feels it.
And what Joe was talking about when he says remote viewing, it's not like looking down. He wasn't looking down and saying this thing, but he got through his senses, through this extra sense or whatever, he could get it well enough to actually draw what he was quote unquote viewing. And I see it over and over again in my world, because let's face it, now we live in a world where if you're interested in something, it's going to keep being thrown at you. You know, that there's just more out there. There's more to it. And we've talked about my past life regression interaction, right? Recently, I had someone read my tarot cards, which I thought was pretty interesting, just because I thought that was fun. And again, if you've never done anything like this, like, let's face it, there's going to be charlatans everywhere. Right, there just is, and they're in every walk of life. You're always going to run into, you know, any type of. I mean, use jujitsu, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've ran into someone that's like, "Oh, do they make you pay to get your belt?" You know, like, it's just like people that are just not real, right? They're not out for the best. They're not real,
right?
And that's going to happen. And in these esoteric areas, then sure, they're out there. But the fact is that, I'll say it this way, and it's not a quote it's not my quote, it's something else, but witches called it spelling, religious calls it prayer, the medical system calls it the placebo effect, right? Like, everybody's has a name for it, but no one's saying it doesn't exist.
Right. There's a known otherworldly thing. We call it otherworldly because it doesn't appear to us, I suppose, but there is something that happens. And I think there are plenty of people who totally negate that, but I think that it's a little naive to assume that, like, oh yeah, we know everything. We know everything. It's, you know, literally, I don't know, 80 years ago, we had almost no medical information, right? Like, go look at the 1900s, early 1900s. They didn't even know what a heart attack was. You know, we talked about that on the Fat podcast. That's only 100 years ago. It's not that long, right?
There were all these women that were dying after childbirth, because the doctors didn't know to wash their hands.
Yeah, when was this? That was like probably around the same time.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago.
So what do you think will be? So my last question. 30 years from now, 50 years from now, what do you think the people 50 years from now will be looking back and saying, really, they didn't know that?
Well, certainly, I think we'll have an answer to mental health. And I think it's going to be quite obvious. It's going to be stuff that like people probably somewhat know.
Intuitively?
Yeah. Like you kind of like, how about not a constant bombardment of short form TikTok content? Like,
It's so funny you went there. I asked this question to somebody recently, and they looked at me and they go, I was like, what's the one thing that you think in 30 years they'll look back and be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
He goes, they let their kids use it?
Yeah, it's obviously terrible. It's like, it obviously is. And everyone knows it. Everyone, you're kind of engaged because you're like addicted to it in some way, but everyone knows that. That's something. The other thing is that in 50 years, we we can't even comprehend the things that are going to be unlocked by super intelligence, right? Things that go beyond even a collective conscious input, like all of our minds put together times an infinite amount of processing power. What comes out there?
Here's the irony, just based on the topic we're having. You know what they call it when our current AI messes up?
What?
A hallucination.
Oh yeah.
Think about that for a second. When the infinite intelligence that we're building makes a mistake,
quote unquote,
quote unquote, they call it a hallucination.
Right.
And here we are talking about this guy that essentially hallucinated for 23 years under the military, on the military dime, for 450 missions.
Right.
There's nothing to that. There's no like simulation going on here. There's nothing like there's no beetle at the window right now. It seems to me that there's something there.
It's interesting because ChatGPT and I catch it now, and whatever, but it will hallucinate different things that I know are true, right? Like things that you can only know, and anyone who's done work for a long period of time in one specific area knows that there's things that just seem to happen. You don't know why they happen. You just know intuitively that this is how it works, and you can't really explain exactly. There's plenty of things with like health and behavior development, things that I pick up, but it will start to hallucinate those things too. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, how do you grasp that? I know there's nothing written about, this fact, or I know that fact that you hallucinate is not supported at all, but a lot of things point to that, just have never been like proven yet. It goes out. It's like, yeah, that's a fact.
Yeah. And and now think about where we're at. And this was literally, what are we on, year 4 of having a model that we can that the general public is feeding?
Yeah, if that. Well, we got 2 more years of stagnancy. Well, not really stagnant, but before things start getting out of control, apparently, according to certain models.
Really?
Yeah. They said 2027 is when things like really get kind of out of hand. Like you can't control it at that point. Like whatever we've done up until 2027 is marking our fate, so to speak, whether that's good or bad or positive or not or totally amoral. There's not much that can be done after 2027 when it comes to artificial intelligence.
All right. Well, I'll leave you with this then, because
we are big supporters of AI, for the record. I know that you have transcripts, and we want to just say that we are in line with whatever you decide is good for us.
Simple Healthy Life podcast is very friendly. Friendly is the word, friendly.
Yeah.
So we'll leave you with this because, we like doom and gloom on this podcast. What year was the Terminator supposedly set in? So it was written in 1984. Ironic. But what year was it set in?
I don't want to know. What is it?
2029.
Oh my God.
Is when the Terminator comes back to kill.
That is insane.
So there you go. You're welcome, everybody. Good luck. Get your remote viewing going. Yeah. Start practicing now.
Yeah. Praise AI.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that was hopefully we had a little fun with that one. So thank you guys for listening. We will be happy to talk more about these type of interesting topics. And if you have any suggestions, shoot us a note. Thanks.